Yes, welcome to another video. On this occasion I want to talk about who built the pyramids of Giza and those of Mexico. There is history, there are documents, there are references that the tribe of Issachar built it. And the tribe of Issachar are the Mexicans, that there is also biblical evidence, there are documents, there are references, the Spanish documented it, and I am going to reveal all of that in this video. More specifically, the Giza pyramid was built by none other than Job from the Bible, and there are also many articles about this. And they are not new, they are from the 60s. There are several writers who suggest that Job built the Giza pyramid, which the Bible also supports. His own book mentions almost all the principles of the pyramid, and it mentions that Job was a king, he was a pharaoh, and he had a dynasty. We are going to go into all those details here in this lesson that I am going to call Job the Wizard of Ounce, and his pyramid his Great Pyramid. That in the book of Job, he called his pyramid the Rock. Let's go into that detail. Why do I say that they called him the Wizard of Ounce? Like in the movie, because he had to leave Egypt even though he was king, and there is history to support that. He had to leave Egypt and had to go to the land of Uz, which is the land of Edom, but more specifically it is the land of Amalek, which is between the limits of today's Jordan and Arabia. The Arabs called Job the Wizard of Ounce like in the movie. I'm going to talk about these here topics in this lesson. First, the tribe of Issachar, including Job, built some pyramids in Egypt and of course then those in Mexico, because there are some idiot Edomite scholars, the Gabachos, that even the pyramids in Mexico, they say, were not built by the Mexicans, that aliens built them, or something like that, just to take credit away from our people. But in this video, I am going to prove that the Mexicans built the pyramids of Egypt than those of Mexico. I am also going to talk about why there are discrepancies in the dates of the construction of the pyramids. I'm going to go into detail, but just so you know, the dates, they have been changing from the dates that really coincide with Job, and then they are making them older and older, which doesn't make any sense, because if you date them older, they would have been built before the flood and before human creation, which makes no sense. I am going to go into evidence from themselves that they lie on the dates to hide certain truths from the Bible. I also want to talk about the characteristics of the pyramids that are mentioned in Job, and there are many principles of mathematics and geometry that are mentioned in the book of Job, for example the constellation of Orion, that both the pyramids of Mexico and the pyramids of Giza are aligned to that constellation. I also want to talk about why the pharaohs of Egypt began to hate the Israelites, given that at the beginning they trusted Joseph and they trusted Job. They let them become kings because there was Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. Joseph, I think, worked for a pharaoh from Upper Egypt, and Job reigned more or less in Lower Egypt. But why did the pharaohs suddenly turn against the Israelites? And all of that makes sense. You are going to be surprised. You know who the party pooper of the world is? Esau Edom, and Esau Edom was the one to blame for the Egyptians beating us up and putting us in slavery. Well, at the end of the day, God wanted it, but I'm going to go into detail. I'm going to go into the whole story. Job built the pyramids, well, at least the Great Pyramid, and then his sons built the others in Giza. But Job was hated because he did not allow anyone to be an idolater while he was king in Egypt. He did not allow anyone to be an idolater. And that is in history and in the Bible. And I am going to go into detail about the historians who talk about it. Job had to leave Egypt, and his sons continued to reign. He had to leave because he was hated. He was very strict. He did not let anyone be an idolater. Then when he left, the Amalekites, who lived among the Israelites in the land of Goshen, the Amalekites decided to make a pact with Cush, and that is mentioned in the book of Job. Both the Sabaeans and Chaldeans are Cush. In history, the sons of Cush were mercenaries, so the Amalekites took the kingdom from the family of Job and the tribe of Issachar. And when you do, as they say in French, coup d'état, when you stage an invasion of a kingdom, you have to kill the whole family, so the Amalekites ordered the killing of Job's entire family, who were kings of Goshen at the time, except for Job, because Job did not live in Egypt. He was saved, as the book of Job says, and that is why he fell into depression, because they killed his entire lineage. And after that the Amalekites controlled Egypt, and those are the ones known as the Hyksos kings, because the Egyptians knew the Hyksos as all those who were sons of Shem, which included the Arabs, included the Israelites, and the Edomites, the Hyksos kings that got ran out. They were not Israelites, they were Amalekites. The Amalekites took control after they killed Job's family, and they reigned, I think, 108 years or something like that, and then the children of Mizraim. The Egyptians took control again, they ran out the Amalekites and enslaved the Israelites. Because as the Bible says, if they didn't enslave us, we might join with the Amalekites against Egypt, and that is why they enslaved us. Before that, the Israelites were kings in Egypt. And I am also going to talk about the possible technological functions of the Great Pyramid, and evidence that Issachar and the indigenous people in general are Israelites, and that Issachar are the Mexicans. First, I want to read an article from 1964 written by a scholar named Herman Ho that he does a very in-depth study and brings out all the references and evidence of why he believes, and the Bible supports it, why he believes that Job built the Great Pyramid, Job a member of the tribe of Issachar. The Mexicans are the tribe of Issachar, and I am going to prove it. This scholar Herman Ho published this article in 1964. You can search for this article. Here I am going to place an image. But you can search for it. I am going to read it in Spanish, but the study that he did originally was published in English. We are going to read it. Did you know that the builder of the Great Pyramid is identified in the Bible? Is what Herman Ho says, who built the Great Pyramid of Giza? Egypt? When and why was it built? Is there any supernatural revelation hidden in its mighty stones? Was the pyramid built to make the Bible clear and understandable? Are the speculations of the pyramidologists true? These are the surprising answers. The first point this man makes is, what we find in Giza, opposite Cairo, across the Nile River, is the most famous architectural wonder in the world. The Great Pyramid of Giza remains the most massive building in the world for 3,500 years. It was also the tallest building in the world, only in this last generation has man built taller buildings than the Great Pyramid. However, the Empire State Building, New York, the tallest building on Earth today, this article, remember, is from 1964. It has only 3 parts out of 5 of the volume of the Great Pyramid. Source: The Ancient History of Cambridge. Volume 1, page 281 of Clara from the Great Pyramid. There is a source, right? He's not making it up. Its perfect construction compels our admiration. Its mathematically correct alignment with the cardinal points. Often a knife cannot be inserted between the joints of the stone. The Great Pyramid is so incredibly precise that errors of the compass can be compared to it, writes Leonard Cottrell in his recent book, The Mountains of Pharaoh, in 1957. Dr. Meredith and I visited the pyramids twice while we were in Egypt. We found the exterior of the pyramid, ruined by the Arabs over the centuries. They carried and used the polished white stones that once made the pyramid shine in the sun and moonlight, but the interior of the pyramid remains an architectural marvel. The stones they contain have not moved a hair since the day the workmen fixed them in place. The flatness of the surface of the stones and the squareness of their corners are extraordinary. Literally acres of surface of polished stone equal to the work of today's opticians line the passages of the Great Pyramid, but not everything is perfect workmanship. Human imperfection is noticeable in the rough and unfinished masonry of the floor of one of the chambers. The floor of the king's chamber, flagrantly out of level. Everything speaks of remarkable human workmanship, but does it speak of a divine revelation as pyramidologists theorize? If this powerful architectural marvel is a divine revelation, where is the divine perfection? However, the Great Pyramid is one of the wonders of the world. It is the only one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world that still remains without a doubt. There is some significance in its durability through the centuries, especially because this pyramid which the cornerstone is missing, it is engraved on our money. Why should we that this gentleman is American, the Americans the sons of Manasseh, the Anglo-Americans are sons of Esau. I want you to know, here this guy was wrong. He says they are the sons of Manasseh. Nonsense, they are the sons of Esau. Well, I'm going to read it as this. Guy says, the sons of Manasseh and the sons of Joseph engraved this Egyptian pyramid on our money. Who was actually responsible for the building of this marvel of the ages? There he made stuff up because he didn't even get sources from where he gets that the Americans are Manasseh, but the rest he does get good sources. Secrets from the pyramids, secrets lost when the Arabs invaded Egypt more than 1,100 years ago. They found the secrets of the Great Pyramids completely lost, even its entrance was unknown. The Arab Caliph Mamun in the 9th century after Christ blindly cut the pyramid in the hope of finding a treasure. Buried in it accidentally reached one of the interior passages, but there was no buried treasure. But Mamun only reopened the Great Pyramid in the days of Jesus Christ, Yahawashi. Entrance to the Great Pyramid was open and was regularly frequented by tourists. The entrance was forgotten in the days of the Catholic domination of Egypt before the arrival of the Arabs. Strabo, the ancient Roman historian, expressly states he has very good sources except where he says Anglo-America are Manassehs. No, it is not true. Strabo, the historian of ancient Rome, affirms expressly that in his time the Great Pyramid was accessible to visitors. He claims a stone that can be moved, and it is interesting that he says that, because I am also going to talk about a man in Florida who also managed to move stones 20 tons or heavier, I think, and he said he had the secrets of the pyramids, and one of his stones weighing several tons was a door, and there are videos because this man died in the 50s. I think there are videos of children moving this stone. He had it balanced perfectly that a child could open it, and they say that this door of the pyramid was the same. It was a stone weighing several tons, more than 10 tons, however it opened very easily. He states that a stone can be moved when it has been lifted. A tortuous passage is seen leading to the tomb. He gives a source book. Book 17, page 808. Dr. Meredith and I climbed to this ancient entrance on the north side of the pyramid. The entrance used today by tourists is, however, the forced entrance cut out by the Arabs. At the true entrance to the Great Pyramid we saw the hieroglyphic carving containing the name of the mighty builder of this architectural wonder of the ancient world. His name in Egyptian is spelled Khufu by modern writers. This name they have there is, by the way, very suspicious because it is not written in the style of the rest of the pyramids, not made with precision chiseled in stones. It is written like graffiti. It looks fake because his real name was Job. How is it? As we will see in this article, its name in Egyptian is Khufu by modern writers. The Greek spelled his name Cheops, and it was pronounced Hiob, which was the CH was H, the P was B, said Hiob. That is why the pyramid is often called the Pyramid of Cheops today. Who was Cheops or Hiob? When and why did he build the pyramid? He was not Egyptian, of course not. He was an Israelite. The Egyptians like to brag about the pyramids. However, they admit that the largest pyramid was not built by an Egyptian, and they admit that all their later copies of the are quite inferior to the pyramid built by Job. Now you are going to see that Cheops is Job. The Egyptian historian Manetho, who lived in the 3rd century before Christ, wrote that Job or Cheops was of a different race than the Egyptians. Of course, he was an Israelite. Wathen's Arts and Antiquities of Egypt, page 54, giving the sources Herodotus. Everyone knows who Herodotus is. The famous Greek historian of the 5th century BC claims that the builder of the Great Pyramid were shepherds. Of course, the Israelites have always been shepherds until today. Here it says that in the book of Herodotus, section 128 of the book called Euterpe, section 128 of Herodotus, but the Egyptians were not shepherds. And here he even takes sources from the Bible. This is a very good study from this man. Genesis 46 verse 31 to 34. And Joseph said unto his brethren, I will go up and show Pharaoh, and say unto him, My brethren. And my Father's house are come unto me, and the men are shepherds, they are the Israelites. And it shall come to pass, when Pharaoh shall call you and shall say, What is your occupation? That ye shall say, Thy servant's trade hath been about cattle, for every shepherd is an abomination unto the Egyptians. I don't know why they hated the shepherds, maybe because they were very lazy. I don't know. The Egyptians weren't shepherds. They hired others to take care of their cattle. However, Cheops, the builder of the Great Pyramid, was a shepherd. Of course, he was Mexican. Another source is Josephus. The Jewish historian wrote that the Egyptians forced the Israelites to build pyramids. Antiquities of the Jews, Book 2, Chapter 9, Section 1. But the pyramids that the Israelites built during their slavery were hastily built, inferior duplicates of the first powerful pyramid built by Job. Who was Cheops or Job in the Bible? The shepherd who built the pyramid, the first pyramid before the slavery of the Israelites. Here in reality this is not accurate. History says that he built the first perfect pyramid, because there was a bent pyramid and then there was Joseph's pyramid. That was in the form of steps, but Joseph made his pyramid and an infrastructure not with intentions to make a temple or some type of electric generator. No, Joseph made his pyramid and made a very large infrastructure where he stored grain and water. And here are the granaries, and they have found them down here. They did not invent it, they have found grains and wheat here below these wells, these granaries, and the pyramid that he built, and it was like an infrastructure. It was like a bank that after there was a famine, people from all over the ancient world had to come and buy, and they got in line, they got in here, they sat here. Is the photo they came here, they bought what they had to buy worth of wheat, and they left, and all that infrastructure was to sell the wheat. So the pyramid that Joseph made, the pyramid that Joseph made in Saqqara, and all this infrastructure that he made like a citadel is called this was the first pyramid, but he made it with the intention of storing grain and water, and from that Egypt became rich, and then Job's father. Of course, the history of Egypt has been totally corrupted. The dates do not match and all that because they try to hide the truth, but Job's father Issachar was the one who made the first bent pyramids. Further south he did some experiments trying to make a pyramid. And Job learned from that, and he did make his perfect pyramid, but the first pyramid was made by Joseph. But his intention was not to make a temple or anything, his intention was to save grain, food, water too. And this is the infrastructure that Joseph built, and here it says that Job was not an idolater, of course. Not in the Bible says it. Job in his book is considered perfect, but of course, he had pride, and that was his sin. Cheops is not an idol worshipper. Job was not a polytheist, he was a worshipper of the only God. Job closed the temples. Here is why they hated him. Name and what is very similar to the way the Greeks say the German name is also said to mean hated. They hated him, so here it says Job closed the temples and forbade the Egyptians to offer sacrifices. Wrote Herodotus. I mean, he is not making it up, it is written. Wrote Herodotus in the Book 2 of his story, section 124. The God whom Job served. Here I think this is a confusion. It was not Amen in the oldest Egyptian spelling, and as strange as it may seem, one of the names of Jesus Christ of the Hebrew is Amen. In Revelation 3, verse 14, ND, unto the angel of the church of the Laodiceans write, These things saith the Amen, the faithful and true witness, the beginning of the creation of God. Yes, indeed, good point, the truth I hadn't even noticed. So it says that Job, according to the inscriptions, worshipped a certain Amen, and Jesus Christ was called Amen once in Revelation 3, verse 14. Very interesting. Pharaoh of Upper Egypt, under whom Joseph served, was called Amenemhet III. Amen was a common name among the pharaohs of Joseph's day. Pharaoh must have been strongly influenced by the religion of Job, but this is not all. Pharaoh Amenemhet gave Joseph to wife Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. Genesis 41, verse 45. Who was the god On? Is it significant that On is but another name, in Greek, for the God Amen, Jesus Christ, Yahwashi, the Lord of the Old Testament? In Revelation 1 verse 8, Christ speaks of himself as the one who is, that existing one. in the original inspired text of this verse. The Greek word Christ used was on, the existing one. The Egyptian rulers knew of the Creator in the days of Joseph. Not until nearly the days of Moses did gross idolatry spread throughout Egypt. However, there is an archaeologist who later I am going to talk about. The scholar talks about idolatry in the times of Joseph, since back then in the time of Joseph, and that is why they hated Job, because he prohibited idolatry. When did Cheops build the pyramid? Interesting that this man has the correct date, because Job would have existed in the time of Joseph. He was a nephew of Joseph, and he does have the correct dates, and yet the dates today are totally crazy. They date them before the flood. Some say 5000 BC, others say 10,000 BC. Make them up because they don't want to admit the truth. I'm surprised that he got it right, the dates when Job or Cheops lived. Now you are going to see that Cheops is another way to say Job, even in Hebrew, as you saw, even in Hebrew. It is very similar. A key up or Job, because the P was actually B in German and in Greek then. It says when Job lived, according to the 11th edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica, he lived 4700 BC, which would make him live 700 years before Adam. Such a date is preposterous. I told you, they are making stuff up. Such a date is absurd. More recent conservative scholars place him 2600 BC, which is also wrong. There is how you know that dates are being invented. I was looking for an article and I couldn't find it, where there were sources from several scholars who changed the dates from when the pyramid was found. At first, they gave it the correct date, and then they changed it, and now they are already at 4700. In the 60s they had this date, and now I think they are up to more than 10,000 years BC, which is absurd. So that's where you realize that they are lying. More recent conservative scholars place him 2600 BC, which is also incorrect, 250 years before the flood in Noah's day. I told you, that does not make any sense, but the flood, according to the Egyptian records, occurred centuries before Cheops lived. Cheops lived after the flood. This date is wrong, too. This man did a very good analysis. Obviously modern scholars do not know when Cheops lived, but they could know if they only believed the Bible record. Of course, some pyramidologists try to date the pyramid by astronomy. They assume that when built, the North Pole star, Alpha Draconis, could be seen from the entrance passage of the Great Pyramid. But the idea is purely an assumption. There is no proof. Furthermore, the North Pole star would have been visible for only a few minutes from the descending passage, because the passage never did point directly to the North Pole star. Some adherents of the British Israel World Federation would try to deny this, but any history book demonstrates the idea false. The facts of history are that Cheops, 1726 to 1663 BC, was a young contemporary of King Zoser of Egypt. Zoser, 1737 to 1718 BC, built the step pyramids. As I told you, the step pyramid was a citadel to store grain and sell it after the famine with Joseph, between Joseph and the Pharaoh, a project that they worked on shortly before Job built his Great Pyramid. State funds are needed for big infrastructure projects. A project this big can only be achieved by a government, and a government with a lot of money. Egypt never had wealth until Joseph made Egypt rich by selling its grain shortly before Job built the Great Pyramid. And here it has a source, the source, Budge, A History of Egypt, Volume 2, page 9. Now the surprise of the story is that King Dosa ruled part of Egypt at the same time that Joseph was prime minister under Pharaoh. Amenemhet III, king of the Upper Egypt. Ancient Egypt, remember, was an era, a confederation of small city-states, as Greece once was before Alexander the Great and his father Philip arrived. Amenemhet III existed between 1741 and 1692 BC. He was king of Upper Egypt. These dates are correct. But if you look for them today, the dates are totally corrupted. He was the high king of Upper Egypt and pharaoh of all Egypt, but under him there were lesser kings. See for that in chapter 29 of Job, he talks about how he was a king, but he was not the only king because there were states between Egypt and he was king of a part of Egypt, and here he is describing him. Below him there were minor kings, among which was Dosa, was a foreign king whose dominion extended to the delta of Egypt. King Dosa recorded, "The 7 years of the drought in Joseph's time, my heart is very anxious," said Dosa, "because in my time the Nile has not overflowed for a period of 7 years, and..." The source is Cambridge Ancient History. Pages 309 to 310, Volume 1. These are very reliable sources. Cambridge. The Bible reveals that the 7 years of famine that extended from 1727 to 1720. Here is clear evidence that Job or Cheops, a contemporary of Dosa, must have built the Great Pyramid during the beginning of Israel's stay in Egypt, and here it gives the date between 1727 is the stay of the Israelites in Egypt today. I think the date of the Exodus is incorrect. I think it is 1446. I think is the date of the Exodus. Joseph enters the scene, a notable man who helped Job build the pyramid. His name was Suf. He was chief of the works of Khufu, Rawlinson's Egypt, chapter 14. So here where it says that Joseph helped Job build the pyramid, there is a source. The book is called Rawlinson's Egypt, chapter 14. This man has been an enigma for historians. See Maspero's Dawn of Civilization, pages 363 to 364. Elsewhere he is called Saf-hotep, meaning Saf the servant. He was apparently one of 12 brothers who built the labyrinth, the Pentagon of ancient Egypt, for Amenemhet III, Wathen's Antiquities, page 142. Certainly there is no doubt who Suf was. He could be none other than Joseph. The name given Joseph by Pharaoh was Zaphnath-Paneah, Genesis 41 verse 45. The Egyptians still call Joseph Yusef. Certainly there need be no doubt when Cheops lived. A corrupted Egyptian story records an incident in the later life of Cheops or Khufu, in which he calls an aged Egyptian sage to his palace, and here is the source. Budge's Egypt, Volume 2, page 43. The sage lived 110 years. Joseph died at 110 years of age. Genesis 50 verse 26. There can be no mistaking this coincidence. So there is documentation from third parties in history that Job and that Joseph coexisted. As I say, Cheops is Job wrote. Not only did Cheops worship Amen or On, that is, Jesus Christ, he also wrote scripture. Manetho, the Egyptian historian, wrote of Cheops. He was arrogant toward the gods, and that is what it says in the book of Job. He was a little arrogant, but repented and wrote the sacred book, which is the book of Job, a work of great importance. See Wathen's Antiquities, page 268, and Budge's Egypt, volume 2, page 31. But which sacred book? Certainly, none of the sacred books of Egypt, for Cheops closed their temples and forbade their worship. Was this sacred book an Egyptian book? No. Cheops, remember, was a foreign race, and it is quite obvious that Cheops' sacred book was not preserved by Egyptians who later opposed his religion. A clue to the answer is found in Egyptian records. Cheops has another name, Saru of Sharu, Petrie's History of Egypt, Volume 1, page 37. Saru is another name for the inhabitants of Mount Seir, and as you already know, when the book of Job begins, he lived in the land of Uz, and now the book of Job makes more sense. He had to get away from his family, and he had to get away from Egypt, and he went to the land of Edom in Uz. Saru is another name for the inhabitants of Mount Seir. In Edom, Rawlinson's History of Egypt, chapter 22, Khufu, then, was a foreign king whose domain extended from Mount Seir. See, he could hide there because he had dominion in Uz with Edom to Lower Egypt during and after the time of Joseph. Petra is in Mount Seir. Dr. Meredith and I visited, in 1957. By the way, if you look at Job's tomb, I don't know if it is the real tomb, but it is in Jordan in the land of Edom. Job's domain in both Egypt and Mount Seir. Mount Seir was famous in history as the land of Uz. There it is, as the book of Job says he lived in. The land of Uz, volume 3 of Clark's commentary, preface to book of Job. Uz was a descendant of Seir the Horite, Genesis 36 verse 28. The Arabs preserve a corrupt record of Cheops of Mount Seir or of the land of Uz. They call him the Wizard of Ounce. Wizard of Ounce. Now what individual who dwelled in Uz was arrogant, repented of his sin, and wrote a sacred book? None other than Job. Boom! And the holy book is the book of Job. Job, as Mr. Armstrong perceived a long time ago. By the way, this Mr. Armstrong too, there is an article that says the same thing, that Job built the pyramid. And there is also a comment from the Blue Letter Bible that says that Job built the pyramid. So, there is a lot of evidence. As Mr. Armstrong long ago perceived, could be none other than the Cheops who built the Great Pyramid. The ancient Greeks called Job Cheops, pronouncing the letters ch almost as if they were an h. We call Job Hiob in German. And we pronounce the final b as if it were a p, much as the Greeks did. Plainly, Cheops is but an altered pronunciation of Job. Job was a king. I don't know if I will have time to read, but read the book of Job, read chapter 29, and you will see that no one can be described that way unless they are a king. Job was saying throughout his book that he was a king, and there are several chapters where he mentions it. Job 19 verse 9 says that he had a crown, and of course the entire chapter 29 says that he was a king. Now we are going to talk a little of those of the principles and mathematics that is included in the pyramid that is mentioned. Both pyramids, those of Mexico and those of Egypt, that are mentioned in the book of Job, because Job was a Mexican, as I tell you, he was from the tribe of Issachar. Job was a king when Job was being tested. And now let's go into more detail of why they killed his family. As I already told you, the Amalekites invaded and had his family killed because the sons of Cush who killed his cattle and his family were the sons of Cush, were known as mercenaries. So they hired the sons of Cush to kill Job's dynasty. And how he was not in Egypt because he was saved. If not, they would have killed him also. Now that you know the story, it now makes more sense. Why were they suddenly killed his family and wasn't there in the book of Job? He says that he was neither close to his family nor close to his people because his people were in Egypt. And he was in Arabia in the land of Uz in Edom. Job was a king, says when Job was being tested, he wished he had died. And now that you understand the story, when you were a king and they destroy your entire family, your entire lineage, and all your properties in history, whenever that happens, and your kingdom falls, if the king survives, he always wants to die. That's not a surprise. You know what happened to Job. The Edomites invaded, they hired the sons of Cush and destroyed the empire of the Mexicans in Egypt, which were the empire of Issachar. And when those kinds of things happen, those who survive always want to die. I'm surprised he didn't commit suicide here. It says when Job was being tested, he exclaimed that he wished he had died. Why did I not die from the womb? Why did I not expire when I came out of the womb? Then I had rest with the kings and the counselors of the earth, who they build desolate places. That is Job 3 verse 11 to 14. Job buried with kings is the first time he mentions that he is a king. He also mentions it, as I told you, in chapter 19. In chapter 29, Job buried with kings. Of course, he belonged to a royal family. Notice, they listened to me and waited and were silent for my advice. After my words, they did not speak again. I sat as a leader and lived like a king in the army, like one who consoles those who they cry. That is Job 29. When I say Job read Job 29, he is describing that he was a king. Job left a great stone monument. As I told you beginning, Job called the pyramid that he made, he called it the rock, and let's go into more in detail on that, but right now I just want to read this study of this man. Job left a great monument in stone. The great pyramid swelled his pride. One of Job's friends taunted Job, "Thou that tearest thyself in thine anger, shall the earth be forsaken of thee? Or shall the rock be removed out of its place?" Job 18 verse 4, Jewish translation. His friend made fun of him. "Hey, why are you sad? Do you believe that the world is going to end? Or that your pyramid is going to be destroyed because you are sad? No, that is going to stay there forever." What? The earth not to be forsaken of Job even if he were to die? Of course. The rock monument he built would remain for ages, would not be removed out of its place. What rock monument? The Great Pyramid. Now we go to Job 38 verses 4-6. This is God's response to Job. Note that the verses presuppose Job a great builder. It is very true, he was going to enter into that, but maybe what this man says here is enough. But if you read the book of Job, it has many principles that are included in the construction of the pyramid, as if Job already knew, and he did know it. And here it says, now let's go to Job 38 verse 4-6. This is God's response to Job. Note that the verses presuppose Job a great builder. He paraphrases God's response. Compare it with the book of Job and the accompanying article Where is God? By Robert Gentet. You, Job, laid the foundations of the Great Pyramid. Here they are paraphrasing Job, as if he was a great builder. The source is a book by Robert Cantet. And he did this paraphrasing of the scriptures is so that you understand that Job built the pyramid, and it says you, Job, laid the foundations of the Great Pyramid, but where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? You, Job, determined the measures on the pyramid in Egypt. But who determined the measures of the earth and stretched the line upon it? You, Job, fastened down in sockets the foundations of the pyramid, but whereupon are the foundations of the earth fastened? You, Job, were not able to lay the pyramid's capstone, for your work was not absolutely perfect. But I laid the cornerstone of the earth, said God. That whittled Job down to size. He was not as big as he himself presumed. God always does that for those who believe they have 100% truth. That whittled Job down to size. He was not as big as he himself presumed. But who was Job? Almost done. With this article, Cheops lived in Joseph's time. So did Job. Job lived in the generation after Esau. For one of his friends was Eliphaz the Temanite, Job 2 verse 11. Eliphaz was the father of the Temanites, Genesis 36 verse 11. Well, the fact that Eliphaz was a Temanite does not mean that he was an Edomite. Perhaps it just meant that he lived in the land of Teman, who he was a son of Esau, so that is not necessarily true, and the son of Esau, Jacob's brother, verse 10. Eliphaz and Joseph were first cousins. Yes, that is true, but here it is only clearing up when Job lived. He was a grandson of Jacob, son of Issachar, nephew of Joseph. He lived in Joseph's time just like an uncle lives at the time of a younger nephew. Job lived before the Mosaic law that only allowed sacrifice to the Levites. Note that Job sacrificed to God for his family. Very true, because at that time, a person who was not from the tribe of Levi could sacrifice. The Mosaic law did not yet exist. How it used to be in patriarchal times, as mentioned in Job 1 verse 5, 42:8, none of the conversations in the book of Job refer to the Exodus under Moses, because it was still about 300 or more years before the Exodus, but the flood is still the most important thing in people's minds. Job 22 in verse 17-18. Cheops or Job came to the throne in 1726 BC. That date is proved in the forthcoming book on world history. I am going to tell you that I did not know. Surprisingly, that is the year in which Jacob entered Egypt with his family. A coincidence? Consider this. Coming into Egypt with Jacob in 1726 was a grandson named Job, and these are the names of the children of Israel who came into Egypt, Jacob and his sons. And the sons of Issachar, there it is, at the end. I am going to talk about how the Mexicans are Issachar, and Issachar had 4 sons, and the Toltecs, whose name comes from Tolar, a son of Issachar. It was Tolar or Tula. There is a place in Mexico called Tula, and there is a tribe called the Toltecs, and there are some Toltec ruins where the 4 sons of Issachar are commemorated. Look for that image, you will see there are 4. Issachar had 4 sons, Tolar, and Fuva, and Job, and Shimron, Genesis 46:13. In 1 Chronicles 7 verse 1, Job's name appears as Jashub or Iashub, and that makes sense because Job means hated, but after he left Egypt his name was Jashub, which means he is going to return. Egyptian historian Manetho derived the name Suf of Suf for Cheops. Or Job. Similarly, he spelled the name Joseph as Suf, by dropping the first non-consonantal syllable. Cheops or Job was Joseph's nephew. He exhibited vast mathematical and astronomical knowledge. Of course, because it was, as I tell you, that is the gift of Issachar, same as all the ruins in Mexico and Central America, that although it is another tribe, there is evidence in the Bible and archaeological evidence that although they were another tribe, the leaders of the Mayans were from the tribe of Issachar, they were Mexicans. Cheops or Job was Joseph's nephew. He exhibited vast mathematical and astronomical knowledge in building the pyramid. Was this kind of knowledge a characteristic of the tribe of Issachar, from which Job sprang? Let 1 Chronicles 12 verse 32 answer, and of the children of Issachar, men that had understanding of the times, to know what Israel ought to do. Jewish commentators understand this to mean mathematical and astronomical knowledge, including the body of information by which the Hebrew calendar was determined and the annual festivals arranged. Now let's see the comparisons between the Giza pyramid and the pyramids of Teotihuacan. Look at this video as you can read here in the subtitles. The precise astronomical alignment in both places with the stars that form Orion's belt is surprising. By the way, that is in the book of Job. In both cases, it continues to fascinate archaeologists and scientists, raising questions about the vast technical astronomical knowledge required for the construction of these, as we have just read. This is a gift of the tribe of Issachar. Two large architectural complexes, in addition to the Pyramid of the Sun in Teotihuacan and the Great Pyramid of Orion, they are two large architectural complexes. The Giza Pyramid has the same dimensions at its bases. A curious fact is that the Sun Pyramid of Teotihuacan is located exactly in front of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Therefore, when the last ray of the sun touches the top of the Great Pyramid of Giza, the first ray of the sun touches the top of the Pyramid of the Sun in Mexico. Recent research has discredited the theories of extraterrestrial participation. That is true, there were no extraterrestrials. This was the talent of the Mexicans of the tribe of Issachar, not of the extraterrestrials, although the Bible does talk about extraterrestrials. But what you see is not green big head dudes. They are spirits, and those spirits can transform. They can materialize, they can become people, but they are not actually little green dudes. They almost never become people, so to speak. They are the armies of God, what they call UFOs. In reality, they are only there to ensure that what is written in the Bible happens. They are not very interventionist, as one could say, so they were not building anything. There were no UFOs anywhere in the world building anything. Theories of extraterrestrial participation in the construction have been discredited. Yes, it is very good those were not UFOs. Instead, the archaeological evidence suggests that the pyramids were built by ancient civilizations using advanced engineering techniques. Yes, very true. These sites show remarkable capacity of prehistoric societies and his deep knowledge of architecture, astronomy, and culture. In conclusion, there are surprising similarities between the pyramids of Teotihuacan and Giza. There is still no definitive evidence of a connection. Yes, there is the tribe of Issachar. Anyway, there they mention a little about the similarities between Teotihuacan and Giza. The Temple of the Sun and the Moon and the Temple of Cheops are in the same position as the belt of Orion that is mentioned in the book of Job, Orion's belt, which is basically how these three pyramids are arranged on the Giza plateau. It uses the same mathematics that are mentioned in the book of Job, but that is the point, that there are similarities between the pyramid that Job made and the pyramids of Mexico, and there are other articles. If you want to see other articles, here is another one. You can copy this page. That is one, and also here is another one from the Blue Letter Bible page. Copy this link, and there are things here that are not true, but the interesting thing is that it does mention Job in the Blue Letter Bible itself. Here it is. And it mentions that Job was the one who built the pyramid. Also, now we are going to read a little of the principles found in the pyramids, also found in the book of Job, Job 37 verse 18, as thou with him spread out the sky, which is strong, and as a molten-looking glass. I already covered it. In the article that Mr. Herman Ho wrote, it was already explained how he is talking about the pyramid. But this scientific principle is talking about when the world was created, and there's some lines in the world that are invisible, that have magnetism and electricity, that the pyramids of the Giza pyramids were aligned to those lines that are called the ley lines. Later I will talk more about that. The ley lines were used by other people for technological inventions such as free energy, and today the elite uses it for their HARP climate control system. All their HARP machines are near ley lines. So they know the technology of the pyramids, but they use it for evil and not for good. There is a concept of ley lines that are invisible lines because it says, looking glass, ley lines are lines of invisible energy that can practically give free energy to everyone. There is one principle: the Great Pyramid is located on a ley line, and another scientific principle in Job is Job 38 verse 4, where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare, if thou hast understanding, who hath laid the measures thereof, if thou knowest? Who hath stretched the line upon it? As I tell you, here he is also alluding to the ley lines. Another principle of the pyramids in Job 9 verse 9, which maketh Arcturus, Orion, and Pleiades, and the chambers of the south. He is talking about the constellations, the Giza pyramid, and the pyramids of Teotihuacan are aligned to the constellation of Orion. And also in Job 38 verse 31, canst thou bind the sweet influences of Pleiades, or loose the bands of Orion? That is the belt of Orion, that the pyramids of Teotihuacan and the pyramids of Giza are aligned with Orion's belt. It is no coincidence. And if you read chapter 29, as I already told you, and the entire chapter describes how he was a king. I am not going to read it, because the video is very long. Now we are going to talk about the reasons for the discrepancies in the dates of the construction of the pyramid, because as I told you, the study that Mr. I forgot his name Herman Heo did is correct, but today they say that they were built in 5000 BC or 10,000 BC. Which does not make any sense, and now we are going to listen to an archaeologist who mentions why this happens. If you want to follow him, he has very good information, but he is not totally sincere. He is still under the assumption the Jews are not colored. He knows, of course, because in one of those videos when there is an archaeological image of the Israelites where they are depicted black or brown, he does not use the image, he uses a caricature, so he is a liar too, but he has a lot of very good information. Let's watch some videos of this archaeologist. This man's name is Douglas Petrovich. He is a Russian Amalekite. And here in this video at minute 17, he admits that when they do archaeology, those who control the governments do not let them connect the findings with the Bible. Many times they even run them out of the country. Let's listen to that now.
It took root and eventually started to grow substantially. Now, who are these Asiatics? Of course, the excavators who are there, they can't connect these Asiatic people with the Israelites, because if they were to, they would be kicked out of Egypt. And there's a reason for that, of course, and it's a political religious one. They're located in the nation of Egypt, which has Muslim control, and if the claim was made by the excavators there that these were actually Israelite people, it wouldn't go so well for them. They wouldn't have the same welcome in Egypt that they've enjoyed all of these decades until now. So,
you see, there is a lot of politics, and the archaeological finds are hidden for political reasons. This Amalekite tells this truth. But he is also a liar. Here in minute 32, he brings out an archaeological image. We already know what it looks like, but he decided to use a drawing because that painting shows dark-skinned people, and he decided to use a caricature, so he is not very honest. He decided to use a caricature where the man is depicted as pale. The dark skin no longer shows on him, and here is the original. Not even the hand shows. The bastard, so he's a damn rat too. That guy, but he has good information. I recommend that you watch some of his videos, but remember that he continues to lie, saying that those who are in Israel today are Israelites. And they are not. In this video in minute 9, the man admits that archaeologists are often there to lie against the Bible. Right now we are going to hear it.
As such, and he obviously was not well received. His publication was not well received by everybody in the scholarly world, because many scholars are not looking for something that will connect the ancient world with the text in the Bible, but the opposite, to try to disprove that there was any kind of substantive connection. So John Garstang felt this opposition and these attacks from scholars, and to this day, his work is challenged by later archaeologists there and by modern scholars today. But he did very good work, especially.
In this video, this Mr. Douglas Petrovich admits that when Abraham left the land of Europe, the Chaldeans, the civilization that existed, only had 3 dynasties. This was the first civilization after the flood. So how can it could be that according to the dates they have today of the pyramids? Sometimes they say it was the 12th dynasty in Egypt. I don't know the number of dynasties. It would have to be the 1st or 2nd dynasty in Egypt at that time, because the first civilizations were where Abraham lived. So how can it be that in Egypt they were already in the 12th dynasty? That is a lie. The entire history of Egypt is corrupted on purpose. I had already said it, and everything has to do with the Mexicans, because that would not only take away the pride that the Egyptians, it would also take away the pride of Israelis. This great pyramid was built by the Mexicans. You can listen here. I'm not going to play this video, but you can watch this video in your own time and you will see that when Abraham left the Chaldeans, the first civilizations were only in their 3rd dynasty. Egypt would have even less dynasties at that time. In this video, the same man admits that the dates are wrong. In everything, in the dinosaurs, in the pyramids, many of the civilizations are exaggerated. And he says that the archaeology supports a young world. As the Bible says, the world is not millions and millions of years old.
So the question is just where can we and how can we line up the dates better to work with the young earth? And I believe that's possible, but it goes beyond the time I have here to try to connect all of that.
In this video, the archaeologist Professor Petrovich says, as I have been telling you in many videos, that the Israelites at the beginning were not slaves, they were sovereigns in Egypt, and he also talks about how the Israelites were worshipping idols long before the Exodus. Let's see what he says.
That Ephraim and Manasseh came to oversee the homestead after Jacob's death at Avaris. Joseph is off doing his thing with Pharaoh. He's second in command. So Ephraim and Manasseh take over at Avaris. Ephraim is the ruler there. He becomes the mayor, and they run the city among all of the other brothers of Jacob. They are sovereign there. They're the big shots. That being the case, it's not surprising. Cry out to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They cried out to Hathor. You know what it says in the book of Jeremiah? It says that before the Israelites left Egypt, they were already worshiping the gods of Egypt.
That's why they hated Job, because Job didn't let them be idolaters and something else. I don't know if you realized that when Job wrote his book, the Hebrew writing did not yet exist, it was just developing, so he had to have written his book in cuneiform with, how do you say that, in the writings of Mesopotamia, called cuneiform, something like that. Or he had to have written it in the form of writing of the Egyptians. I don't know what year they translated it into Hebrew, which is similar to how the Phoenicians write, which is called Ancient Hebrew. When they translated it, they had problems because many of the words were no longer used, because Job was the first book of the Bible. He did not only use another way of writing, he also used words that no longer existed. So many times when you look here in the Blue Bible, many words do not exist elsewhere, but only in the book of Job is the only time they are used, because Job was the first book of the Bible and the Hebrew alphabet did not yet exist. It was just developing, and here this man brings that out how it developed at the beginning. For example, A was a cow. The word for cow in Hebrew is aleph or something like that, and it sounds like an A, and at first they only drew a cow and then it developed into what today is called ancient Hebrew, which is the same way of writing as the Phoenicians. So yes, it is a bit interesting how it develops from the cow to ancient Hebrew aleph. Now let's talk about who are the Hyksos kings. The Egyptians considered the Hyksos to be all the shepherds who came from the area of Canaan, which included the Arabs, the Edomites, and the Israelites. All of them were children of Abraham and they were shepherds, but as you know, the children of Esau are today the biblical devil. They are the ones called Europeans, Caucasian gringos. They moved with the Israelites in Avaris, the Nile Delta. I have an article there that verifies it. What happened is that after they moved there, they invaded Job's dynasty. Here is the page, and it is an article with sources. You can read it on your own time, but they suggested that the Hyksos were biblical Amalekites. They say they are the Amu Arabs. The Amalekites are not Arabs, but they did live among the Arabs. Mentions Agag. Agag was an Amalekite. As we already know, Amaleks are found in the list. Descendants of Esau. Amalek means beggars, inhabitants of a valley. The Hyksos as rulers of foreign lands sounds little like Amalek, the first of the Gentiles of the nations. This is the article mentions that the Hyksos were Edomites. You can read it. I don't like that article very much, but it does mention some sources. A man called Gerald Marcy suggested that the Hyksos were Amalekites. Wicked unclean lepers. That is, the theory was that these Hyksos were Amalekites considered unclean lepers, but in reality the person who says it is the same Mr. Petrovich. I can't find the video there, but you can look for it. He talks about the expulsion of the Hyksos, and he is the one who mentions that after they expelled the Hyksos, that is, the Hyksos invaded and became kings. There are some dates for that. They became kings for 108 years, and they took control of the region that Job controlled, which is the lower part of Egypt, and the dynasty number is not certain because, as I tell you, the numbers are not correct, but they had 2 or 3 dynasties, just as the Israelites had 2 or 3 dynasties. You can look at that history, not just this man. Other historians say it. What they don't tell you is that those Hyksos whom they chased out were Amalekites. But you don't need more than the book of Job, because the book of Job mentions that his family was killed by Cush, but he spends his time cursing the Edomites, and it even gives more meaning to the book because it says the world is given to the wicked, because he was the king of Egypt, and immediately when his kingdom fell, the wicked, the Amalekites, entered, and of course it was also prophetic at the end of time the world is handed over to the wicked, but there he does not say that, like in Esdras, who says Esau is the end and Jacob is the beginning that follows. He does not say that. Yes, it is prophetic, but he is also talking about in his life the world was handed over to the wicked. The Hyksos took away his kingdom, and the Hyksos had 3 dynasties, and after they were expelled the Israelites were enslaved, and that is verifiable history. You can look for it here among this man's videos or in other sources. There will be no problem for that. What is more difficult find is that they were Amalekites, and if you search, you will find information about that also. Now we go to the next point. Then the Hyksos were Amalekites, and the Hyksos hired Cush to invade the kingdom of Job, the kingdom of Issachar. That Issachar later became the Mexicans. So when the Hyksos invaded the region that Job controlled, when the Egyptians expelled them, they began to look at the Israelites with distrust and enslaved them. Now I'm going to show you a video of this professor. He says the same thing. Here it is. I already found it. This man mentions how the Hyksos invade Egypt, which was Job's empire, as I already got all the evidence of that. They orchestrated the killing of Job's family and his cattle, and they have 3 dynasties. They reign for 108 years. After they are kicked out of Egypt, the Egyptians enslaved the Israelites. Now we are going to listen to that. The Hyksos invaded the region where Job ruled, because there is an Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. They invaded under Egypt. And they lived among the Israelites, but as you know, they are treacherous, so they invaded. The book of Job mentions that Cush killed his cattle, as I tell you, historically, the Ethiopians were mercenaries, but he curses the wicked, Edom, because he knew that the wicked took away his kingdom.
And these Hyksos people, they established their headquarters, their capital city, as Avaris. So they're living among the Israelites. And they lived there for about 108 years, according to the ancient Egyptian records. So they leave in about 1560 when they're actually chased out after several decades of warfare between the Israelites and the Egyptians. So the Hyksos are chased out by the native Egyptians, and the survivors move to Canaan, a site called Sharuhen, and they hole up there. And it's during that time that this native Egyptian king takes over Lower Egypt for the first time in this era of history. And so as he takes over, he looks around and he says, wow, my army's been decimated by this war with the Hyksos. We did manage to overtake their capital city, so they're either dead or kicked out, and the people who are left, they move to Canaan. But there are these other Asiatic people all around us here in this area of Avaris, and they outnumber us. What are we going to do if these people, these Asiatics, move to Canaan and they live among the Hyksos who are survivors there, and the Hyksos teach them how to use their weapons, and they all come back after us, and they launch a war against us? It's going to not go well for us. So what the native Egyptian king did is he issued a decree saying that these Israelites are going to be subject to forced labor, and they're going to be in a difficult life. And that's the way we have to deal with them. We have to subdue them to make sure they don't join themselves to our enemies, the Hyksos. And this native Egyptian king, he was named Ahmose. We know of him in the Bible as the king who arose in Egypt who did not know of Joseph. So Ahmose is the king who did not know of Joseph.
You can see more of the video, but he talks about how there is archaeology that demonstrates this order of the new Pharaoh to enslave the Israelites, and as you see, everything now makes more sense. Joseph reigned in Upper Egypt, Job reigned in Goshen. The Amalekites, who were the Hyksos, invaded the Job's kingdom. 108 years later, the Egyptians chased the Amalekites and then enslaved the Israelites because they knew that they were relatives, right? Esau and Jacob are relatives, and they thought that perhaps they were going to join the Hyksos and invade Egypt, and they enslaved them because of Esau, Edom. Now we are going to look at a few interesting things about the pyramids. But this man has interesting points. You can watch the video. Some things I already mentioned before, but a thing I didn't mention is that the pyramid doesn't have 4 sides, it has 8 sides. The pyramid is about 755 feet long, made of stone blocks that weigh between 2 and 40 tons. Today the trucks can only carry the maximum, I think, of about 15 tons. So today this structure could not be made. And here is another curious fact: the pyramid does not have 4 sides, it actually has 8. Each side is slightly concave, so it can only be seen clearly from above. During the equinoxes, yes, those angles are also perfect. As the article says that Job is the one who built the pyramid, it is not perfect. There are errors in the pyramid and there are errors in the mine, which shows that it was made by human beings, and that they used electric saw blade technology with lasers, etc. But they weren't aliens, and they weren't totally perfect. There were human errors, so maybe the angles were perfect, but not everything was perfect, Job says, and that was mentioned in the Bible. Job somehow knew the size of the earth. If you take the height of the pyramid and multiply it by 43,200, you get the radius of the earth. Within 11 miles of the polar radius of the planet, that is 99.7 accurate, and you take the perimeter of that of the pyramid and multiply it by 43,200, you obtain the distance, the circumference of the earth at the equator with an accuracy of 99.3%. We know that the ancients obsessed with the equinoxes. When day and night have the same duration, day and night on an equinox is 43,200 seconds. In short, what he concludes is that it is a power plant, which is something that Tesla and other people also thought that it was a power plant. Pyramid builders created an energy-generating machine tuned to the natural harmony of the Earth's vibration that comes mainly from tidal energy created by the Moon's gravity. This technology created thousands of years ago could generate clean and unlimited energy. But how did they get it? Energy that brings us back to Tesla, if this is true. Tesla considered the pyramid a power plant, and he used the same mathematics to build this tower. And what if he created energy that was wireless and was free with the same principles of the pyramid, also built on a ley line, and he could use his wireless power, and the tower was later destroyed by the government after he died, and today instead of this tower in the same region there is one of the harp antennas. So, they use that technology to cause chaos, to create storms and tremors and all those things. You can watch this video and see more clearly that it also shows the constellations and everything that I already mentioned before. This is another interesting video of the mathematics and science behind the pyramid. As I told you, right? It was not a temple, there was no idol, all the stones were conductors of electricity. There were images of light bulbs and circuits that Tesla used, and as you already know, Tesla, with that technology, managed to produce free energy, which is another reason why the pyramids always say that they were made in another date. They lie all the time. Well, they hide from the pyramids and also the Tesla technology because nothing for free is convenient for them. They are not going to give anything for free. They prefer to pollute the world and charge you rather than give you something for free. Because in reality, energy can be free and without contaminating anyone, as it was in the pyramid, and as was this tower that Tesla made. His plan was to build these towers all over the world and have free and clean energy, and there you can search for more videos, but it is obvious that the pyramid, at least the Giza pyramid, is not a temple, it is not a tomb, it is a type of electricity generator. And another thing is that there was a man named Edward Leeds Skolnin who built a site in Florida that was called Coral Castle. At first, he bought a piece of land near the ley lines after he got sick with pneumonia. He was dying, and they asked him how you got cured. You were already dying. The doctor told him you just have a few months left. And he said, I cured myself with electromagnetism, and he wrote a book of magnetism. And this man, called Edward Leeds Skolnin, you can search there for videos of him. He took stone from his land and built megalithic sites with some stones. I think they were up to 40 tons. Some of the stones were larger than the stones of the Pyramid of Giza, and it had a plant to generate energy based on magnets. Was not very big, but it was free energy based on magnets, and it had electric saws, etc. So the principle for cutting stones is not something out of this world. The dude was only 5 feet tall, and he weighed 100 pounds. He was the size of a child, and he could move stones weighing 40 tons, and since the place where he moved there were neighbors, 2 people saw him levitate the stones. In other words, he used the properties of the stones to charge them with electromagnetism and the ley lines so that they would not weigh so much. And after they were going to make a construction around his house, he decided to move all his stones and all his castle. He decided to move it 10 miles north. As I told you, there were some stones weighing up to 40 tons at that time, and I think that until today there is no tractor that can move them, much less lift them. I think they can lift about 15 tons, and there were some stones that weighed up to 40 or more, and he moved his entire castle 10 miles. And they say that he did use trucks, but they never saw him load the stones. He did not let them see him load the stones, and when they asked him how he did it, he said he knew the secrets of the pyramids of Giza. He wrote a book on magnetism. In other words, using electromagnetism and stones that conduct electricity, he was able to make the stones either weigh less or even levitate in the air. I don't really know all the details of that technology, but the mystery of cutting has already been solved, and now I am going to show you videos. Evidence has been found in Egypt that they had machines to cut quickly, so quickly that sometimes they made mistakes and had to throw away all the stone, and it cut so fast that sometimes they cut several feet in seconds out of level, that is, crooked. They cut about 5 or 6 feet and they had to throw that stone. So there is no doubt that they had technology to cut the stone. What people question is how they lifted those stones, because even today you can cut a 40-ton stone, but how are you going to move it? And how are you going to lift it? There is the answer from this man called Edward Leeds Kleinin, who also used ley lines as Tesla, and like Job, he was the one who revealed that he could move those stones using electromagnetism. In other words, with magnets, if the stones are conductive of electricity, he could use magnets. And the truth is, the technology, as I tell you, if I knew it, I would be rich with magnets. And with electromagnetism he could make the stones either weigh less or levitate, and there is evidence of that because when he was alive, you can search for videos he made. Some chairs weighing several tons that moved like nothing, the people came and moved the stone chairs, and after he died the stones no longer move, they are very heavy. So it seems that he constantly charged the stones while he was alive so that they would not be so heavy. There is even a door that they show on a video. A child moves a tremendous door, weighing many tons. A child was moving it. You can search for his video, and here is a video. Several videos that show evidence that there was technology to cut. That is no mystery, that the mystery was how they moved, and them, mystery solved. Here it is. Here's a stone that they couldn't use because the saw they were using probably had diamonds and was electric. It was cutting so fast, it got misaligned and they had to throw it away. Here it's crooked. In other words, there is evidence of drilling and of saws. The fable of chisels and hammers is nonsense. There is evidence of drills and technology and electric machines. As I tell you, the great mystery was how do they move them? Yes, you can cut them, but how are you going to move them? That's where it is solved, with electromagnetism being on the ley lines. They can use natural electricity to move the stones, and here they are. Here are more examples of evidence of electric drills and saws. There is where they cut. They were not using a simple chisel. No, they would never finish. They were using electrical machinery. They had more advanced technology than today, but they were not aliens. People were more intelligent before. Now let's go to the last topic here. How do we know that the Mexicans are Issachar? Apart from the scriptures that the first article shows, well, it shows that Issachar was the one who looked at the stars and know the times, etc. Apart from that, I already have a video about Issachar, if you want to see that video. Apart from that, there are documents, there is evidence in the Bible, in the 4th book of Esdras, in the books of Chronicles, Deuteronomy, but apart from that, there is evidence from the conquistadors themselves. When they arrived here, they documented that in general, the origin of the Indians are the 10 lost tribes of Israel, and the origin of the Mexicans is the tribe of Issachar. And now I am going to show you evidence. Here is a book called Chronicle of the Holy Province of San Diego of Mexico by barefoot religious of NSPS Francisco. In New Spain lives illustrious and venerable men who have built with excellent virtues, write them and consecrate them to the glorious San Diego de Alcala, patron and guardian of the same province, F. Baltasar de Medina. This book is from 1682. I have this copy. I put it together some copies from the National Autonomous University of Mexico, but if you want to buy this book, it costs you about $4,000. What does this book say about the origin of the Indians? Offer. They said that Offa was Minor Peru is a little difficult to read because it is blurry and it is using a very old Spanish language, but I will try. It says the Mexicans are originally from the 10 tribes captured by Shalmaneser, king of the Assyrians, at the time of Hosea, king of Israel. For the years 3316 of creation, 684 years before Christ, and here is another date, 63 of the founding of Rome, 3rd year of the Olympiad, 22 of the number of the 64,300 people of the generation and family of Issachar, whom they care for and recognize as their special father. Of the Indians came after the death of Sennacherib to this new world according to them. They say that after Sennacherib died they came to this new world. It is something that I did not know. Wow! I have not found this information anywhere in this new world, through much tribulation. Long solitudes and long roads, bringing with them traditions and customs, some ceremonies of their cult and word, and their language, the speech of their parents, were the Hebrews. Referred to because, and here the reference says the fourth book of Esdras chapter 13, that is. A book you can read plus another book that talks about Issachar is this book that is here. This book is called Origin of the Indians of Peru, Mexico, Santa Fe, and Chile from the year 1891. Here it says on page 154, other authors, although they make these Indians descendants of the Indians, but not of the 10 tribes, but only from the tribe of Issachar, and from these, and from this feeling there were 2 senators from this of these Indians, the father Bejarano, and the second Francisco Carrasco referred to by the great counselor Juan de Solorzano. The Toltecs were the leaders of the Mayans and all of Central America until Copan mentions Copan. All the Mayans, all the leaders of the Mayans, were of Mexican origin. They were the tribe of Issachar, and now I'm going to show you that book here. This whole book is somewhat interesting. The only bad thing is that many of the chapters argue without any fundamentals that the lost tribes arrived by land when the Indians themselves and the scriptures say that they came by sea, and they say that they came through the Strait of Anian, that is, through there where Russia and the Chinese come, which is not true. It is impossible, and also that would last more than a year and a half. The scripture says that they left by water through the rivers of Babylon and arrived in a year and a half. That would be impossible if they went by land through China, which is also impossible to cross to this day, or else there would be a road to reach Russia through Alaska. But what it does say, and is very interesting, mentions the validity of Esdras, and mentions the Indians of Guatemala wrote books that mention that they came from Israel, and that they were led by Mexicans, and that the Toltecs were the captains of all the tribes of Guatemala and Central America. That this is also in the Bible. In the Bible it says in Deuteronomy 33 that the Mayan Empire and the Central Americans would be Zebulun, but in Deuteronomy 33 verse 18 it says that between Zebulun and Issachar will be the leader. So, the Mayan leaders were Issachar, they were Mexican. And here I am going to read you a little from this book that says it is an argument for why Esdras is considered of high authority even though he was not canonical, and it reads, "It does not seem right that Catholics despise as having little authority and place little faith in Esdras, nor does it seem right that they scoff those who cite Esdras to conclude the 10 captive tribes taken by Salmanasar as the origin of the Indians, to say that the 3rd and 4th books of Esdras are not canonical, and to doubt their authority is to go a long way outside the matter, because here it is not a question of the credit that is due to the said books in common, but only of what it says, what they say about the 10 tribes that moved to the region of Azareth, which everyone knew were the American continent. In fact, there is even an encyclopedia, there is a Jewish encyclopedia that says Azareth is the land where the 10 lost tribes lived, and here it says Christopher Columbus identified this land with those of the Americas, and this authority is not mentioned to prove some aspect of divine supernatural faith, but rather as the basis of a historical discourse that only asks for a prudent elevation of human faith, which is required to know the origin of the Indians. And for this attempt the testimony of Esdras cited is the greatest and supreme authority that can be brought, and to which more credit should be given than to all other human stories. This book is from the Library of Guatemala, an apologetics history of the West Indies, and especially the province of San Vicente de Chiapa and Guatemala is from. This is not very old, this book. 1935. What this article was saying here is that in the time of Esdras only about 200 years had passed, and it was a story that he could have investigated if it was true or not. He wasn't going to write something that wasn't true and know very well if it was so. What he wanted about all the other human stories, regardless of biases, there is no reason to doubt, noting could be more credible. So, he was more or less contemporary, and he could have found out if it was not true that they were in the New World. Here on page 61 of this book says that in 1561 the first Indians who learned to read and write Spanish wrote the origin of their tribe of the Kish, and all three said the same thing. Here it says, they say well uniformly. The first three mentioned the same thing, that they are descendants of Israelites without determining tribe, but only say that they are Israel, which in their language is the same as saying about the people and the generations of Israel. And this was a very common tradition and fame among these Indians. Fr. Domingo de Vico, that as one of the first apostles of this kingdom, he knew much about the histories of these people and their relations. In several parts of his writings, he mentions the tradition of these Indians, and rebukes them with what they themselves said, that they are Israelites descended from Abraham, and one of the manuscripts cited mentions Abraham by his own name, and others name Moses, as we will see in all the four cited manuscripts, after several fables in which they refer to the creation of the world wrapped in other errors, that is, among the history that they had of being Israelites. There were things that had been invented because a lot of time had passed, that is, they were around 700 BC to 680 BC, and this was the year 1561, close to 1,000 years before, so they already had fables, they had invented things. But many things coincided with the Bible, and there was no way for them to know so many details of the Bible. If they were supposedly barbarians, they were the Israelites. They agreed to the universal flood. And they agree in the factory of the Tower of Babel. They knew of the flood, and they knew of the Tower of Babel and division of people and languages. They say of the captivity of their fathers in Egypt. And one of them mentions the evil king Pharaoh Issachar, who a Pharaoh even knew the name of Pharaoh. They also agree that their forefathers came out of captivity in Egypt led by Moses. That is the word they use here, captain, and they also use that word when they mention how Mexicans lead the Central American tribes, led by Moses, who guided them through the sea, and they went to some deserts where they had many fights with Moses, which is in the north of Saudi Arabia to the south of Jordan. And that they humbled themselves to Moses and submitted to what he commanded them, many fights with Moses, and that they humbled themselves to Moses and submitted to what he commanded them, and then they went back to having fights and disputes. These manuscripts with their barbaric style refer to the true cause of these disputes with Moses in the desert, because they say that they wanted to see with their bodily eyes the God they worshipped, and Moses preached to them an invisible God that they could not see. And that is why they had the disputes, for which he became very angry, as Moses says, against them. Such were their crimes that they irritated Moses. The meekest of all men says then that Moses, out of his great anger, took them captive to Babylon. These are the brief news that they bring from their origin, which placed them in captivity in Babylon. From the desert, Arabia, where they say that Moses placed them out of his great anger without saying who took them captive. Here when it says Babylon, people will think Babylon was the kingdom of Judah. The Assyrians took the northern kingdom captive, yes, but Assyria controlled Babylon. It was called Babylon, but the Assyrians controlled Babylon. Here it says Babylon. It was the land of Babylon where they say Moses sentenced them because of his great anger, without saying who took them captive or making any memory of the land of promise, or of the judges or the kings who ruled there, or of the kingdom of David or the kingdom of Israel. And these accounts, although they are so truncated and brought with much confusion, enough to persuade that these Indians are descendants of the 10 tribes. And it is still very surprising that these barbarians, after so much time and so many misfortunes, as we will say, preserved these memories for close to 1,000 years, in which they agree with the truths that the sacred scriptures refer to. And they are not far off the mark in saying that Moses, from the disputes they had in the desert, threw them into the captivity of Babylon, because, although there was a great distance of time between one and the other, but in truth, since they had those rebellions with God in the desert, Moses cursed them that they would be taken captive from the land of promise, and thus it is verified that Moses sentenced them from the desert because of his sentence and because of his prophecy to the captivity of Babylon. That is talking about the curses of Deuteronomy. It is about to mention it, and when it came to the case that the 10 tribes were taken captive, they would remember the sentence of the prophecy of Moses in the desert, and this news would come from one to another, forgetting of the happiness they had in their homeland in the time of David and Solomon and of all the other subjects of the kingdom of Israel. That the kingdom of Israel are the indigenous people, the kingdom of Judah are the blacks, and forgetting about Salmon-Ezer, who was the executor of that sentence, is saying that they did not mention all the details, or the happiness they had in Israel, or that it was actually Shalmaneser who enslaved them in Babylon. Although Shalmaneser was an Assyrian, they did not go into those details. But anyway, they remembered they were Israelites. They only kept the memory of the judge who sentenced them. This is Moses. I'm not going to read everything, but I want to see where it says here that Moses sentenced them. In other words, he gave them that curse because they are the curses of Deuteronomy. And below here I think he is going to mention that what they say about their forefathers, that they became infatuated and went crazy in the Babylonian captivity, is not hard to believe, because this is the curse with which Moses cursed the Hebrews if you deviate from the law of God in Deuteronomy 28 in verse 28, and it is even in Latin. I am not going to read it because I do not understand, but it looks macabre, this language. Here it is on page 178 that talks about Tula, which is in Mexico, which are, as I tell you, Tula represents all the son of Issachar, that the monument in Tula has the 4 sons of Issachar, and says that these quiches. Central Americans even mentions Copan here in this book as far as Honduras, that is, the Mayans, these were led by the Toltecs. They were Issachar, a Toltecs leader, founded the Mayas, who 800 years before the conquest came from the province of Tula, whose captain was called Nemaquish, the great Quiche, from whom his vassals took the name, who were called Quiches, and are those who spoke the Quiche language. So they were led by Issacharites, and here it mentions Copan, all of Central America, not just Guatemala. The entire Mayan Empire came from Tula of the Toltecs. That is to say, the captains at least were from Tula. There is more evidence that came from Assyria, that the lost tribes come from, well, they are the Israelites, because, as you know, history says, the Bible says, that the 10 lost tribes were enslaved by the Assyrians, and those are the photos of the Israelites. And now I am going to show them, demonstrate why. You will say, first, these photos are incredibly difficult to find. This one, for example, is in a hidden museum there in the United Kingdom, and this is how the Aztecs and indigenous people in general dress. Like, I think here I have a picture, of course, all the Mexican tribes, but also the Native American tribes in the United States dress like this. And this comes from Assyria in the time, well, maybe the dates are wrong, but at the time when the Israelites lived there, although maybe those dates are correct, but most likely it was before, about 20 years before this. And here is another picture of the Israelites when they were captive in Assyria. As I tell you, who dresses like that? All over the world, only the indigenous people in the New World, especially the Mexicans. And here is another book of an empire. Here is an image from when the Germans did a study of Assyria, and they found this image that they drew with a pencil and paper. The image, I think they already destroyed it, but these are not Assyrians. Before this image was there, now it is no longer there. It is in this book. This book is from 1800. This book is called Art in Chaldea and Assyria, 1884, and these are not Assyrians. These are captives. Here they say procession of captives. They are not Assyrians. They were captives, as you see how they look like the Aztecs. That is the clothing of the indigenous people in the new continent. Well, I think I have already obtained enough evidence to show first that Job from the tribe of Issachar built the great pyramid of Egypt, that the Mexicans are Issachar, that the geometry is similar in Egypt and Mexico, and that they are the same people, and the narrative can no longer be controlled by these gringo scholars, these ones who pretend to know everything but have simply been lying all their lives. As Isaiah 29 verse 16 says, "Surely your turning of things upside down shall be esteemed as the potter's clay, for shall the work say, of him that made it, he made me not? Or shall the thing framed say of him that framed it, he had no understanding?" And for many years, the Edomites have been denying the Bible as if by lying they are going to erase the truth, and they are never going to erase it as Romans 3 verse 4 says, "Let God be true, and every man is a liar."